Miguel was a rather well-known showman in the capital. He hosted a popular weekly show where he invited distinguished guests for sensational conversations over a cup of coffee. He was approaching 30, dressed like a dandy, with slick black hair tied in a ponytail at the nape of his neck, and he indulged himself in everything. On that sunny day, Miguel was rushing to a shoot when he realized at the last moment that there wasn't a single pack of cigarettes left in the glove compartment. He pulled up at the supermarket and, carelessly leaving his fashionable red car on the roadside, entered through the sliding glass doors. Fortunately for him, there was no queue. There was only a lone, wrinkled old woman at the cashier's counter with a bun in her hand, asking the female cashier something. She had stiff curly hair down to her shoulders, a nose piercing, and the name Paula on her badge. Miguel got in line behind the old woman, checking his smartphone as he walked. "Grandma, I'm sorry, I just can't." He heard Paula's voice. "Why is this taking so long?" Miguel thought irritably, glancing at the expensive watch on his left wrist. "My grandson will send the money tomorrow, and I'll pay," the old woman said with a trembling voice. Her eyes were pitiful, and the hand holding the bun was shaking badly. Miguel glanced at his watch again. Time was slipping away inexorably. "Grandma, I would help, but I'm not allowed to," Paula replied impassively, and even her curls seemed to sway in a negative gesture. It was evident that the woman would gladly get rid of the bothersome old lady, but had no idea how to do it. The grandmother, on her part, seemed determined not to give in. Miguel impatiently rubbed the tip of his nose, a habit he couldn't shake off. "Ladies, it seems things are dragging on here indefinitely," he intervened in his usual showman manner and, randomly pulling out a large bill from his pocket, casually threw it on the counter. "Let the grandma take everything she needs, and please give me those green ones over there." The old woman seemed to have not understood at all what had happened. Most likely, she was a bit hard of hearing. Paula, however, looked at Miguel with a mix of gratitude and puzzlement and reached for the cigarettes. Miguel hastily snatched the pack from her hand and almost ran to the exit. Fortunately, nobody had yet objected to his car, and the showman safely plopped down in the seat, ignoring the crumpled checkered jacket that cost a fortune. Turning on the music, he drove off, not noticing someone standing at the entrance to the supermarket, watching him with a long, pensive gaze. A slender girl in a red dress with black polka dots stood on the sidewalk for a while, as if pondering something, then started walking up the street. Exactly 10 days later, Miguel discovered a strange bluish envelope on the windshield. As usual, he was running late for the shoot, so the appearance of an unfamiliar item in his personal space didn't particularly excite him. "Is this a fine?" he exclaimed aloud. "Are you serious? Just what I needed." Miguel grabbed the envelope and tossed it onto the dashboard before getting behind the wheel. Along the way, he conveniently forgot about the mysterious message and didn't remember it until the end of the workday. However, when the tired and contented man got back behind the wheel, the blue envelope resurfaced vividly in his memory. He reached for it with one hand, tore the edge with the other, and pulled out a quadruple-folded sheet of time-yellowed paper. "This doesn't seem like a fine," muttered Miguel under his breath. He didn't know why his heart was pounding so hard. Perhaps it was the paper itself or its elusive scent reminding him of something long forgotten. With trembling hands, the man unfolded the sheet, only to drop it on his lap from the overflow of emotions. What he saw was so unexpected and shocking that Miguel sat motionless for a long time. Voices, images from the past, chaotically flashed before his mind's eye. He tried to fight them off, willing them away like one would shove old worn-out belongings to the back of a closet, but they reappeared at the forefront of his consciousness, even more vivid and frightening. After several minutes, Miguel finally let out a loud exhale and, with trembling hands, delicately picked up the sheet. No, he hadn't made a mistake, and what he saw wasn't a product of his imagination. The drawing on the paper depicted a wooden construction resembling a marionette doll. The inscription above read, "Jorge." The details were also accompanied by signatures, written in a handwriting painfully familiar. Miguel wouldn't mistake those curves and lines for any others. Only one person in the world wrote like that, and he was no more. Suddenly, the man noticed that beside the neat drawing, someone had crudely sketched a map of some terrain with a cross in the middle. A pirate treasure map quickly flashed through Miguel's mind. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and nervously lit one, not bothering to even open the window. Miguel didn't notice that ashes were falling directly onto his light-colored trousers and suede shoes. Right now, he was somewhere far away. The man saw before him a simple wooden house, a fence with a gate, heard the cries of roosters that woke him up every morning at dawn. Then Miguel remembered with melancholy that there were scheduled shoots for the next morning. He needed to go home, go to sleep, then wake up to another day in the life of a successful showman. He reached for his smartphone and dialed Carla's number, a young model he had recently met at one of the social events. "Hey, Miguel, we won't be able to meet today," the girl quickly chattered. "I'm at a reception, you know, everyone's here, from actors to directors. I can't get away, sorry." The man didn't respond, silently pressing the end call button. Carla's chirpy voice, which had previously delighted him, now seemed cloying and artificial. His hand instinctively reached for the glove compartment. Miguel opened it and began rummaging inside. Finally, amidst packs of paper napkins, mints, and old receipts, he found a rough wooden box that fit in his palm. Miguel opened it, revealing a wooden ladybug he had carved as a child, painted red with black dots delicately applied with a thin brush. As the man gazed at the wooden insect, tears unexpectedly welled up in his eyes. Miguel couldn't remember the last time he had cried. Over the years spent in the capital, his heart had been encased in a thick armor that seemed impenetrable. For a long time, this had suited him just fine, but a faint inner voice whispered to him that it couldn't go on like this. Miguel had to find out who had passed him the strange envelope, a message from the past. He started the engine and set off. Initially, Miguel wanted to swing by home and grab a few things, but his hands confidently guided the car onto the road leading out of the city. He realized that this was for the best. He was afraid he might change his mind at the last moment. Miguel spent the entire night on the road and reached the tiny town, more like a village, at dawn, where he had spent his entire childhood and youth. Memories from the past became clearer and more vivid in his mind. There he was, just a boy, running to the pond to watch the fat red carp. There his grandmother buying him mint ice cream in a crispy cone, and there his grandfather. Miguel forcefully cut off the memory. Thinking about his grandfather was too painful. He focused on the road, although at this early hour, there was no one else on it but him. He drove past familiar buildings that hadn't changed a bit over the years. Miguel stopped at a gas station to fill up and grab a snack. Behind the counter, a young girl named Alba, as her badge indicated, dozed off. She seemed very familiar to him. Miguel stared at the girl's face and her straight dark brown hair for a while, then remembered seeing her as a 5-year-old girl. Sensing his gaze, Alba woke up and, greeting him warmly, made coffee and warmed up a hot dog. Of course, she didn't recognize him. Miguel thanked the girl and left. The coffee refreshed him, and he got back behind the wheel. He didn't have much further to go. He traveled this path in silence, focused on the road he once knew like the back of his hand. Indeed, nothing had changed here. It seemed to Miguel that time had inexplicably bypassed this corner of the earth. A man turned into a narrow winding alley, drove a few meters, and stopped by a gate painted in bright red. Behind the fence stood an old 2-story house of a somewhat dirty pink shade. Miguel didn't want to look to his right, but his gaze betrayingly slid up the street. He was right about his feelings. Everything remained the same here, and where there should have been a neighboring house, there was only an empty gap. Miguel coughed. He thought he caught a whiff of the same smoke that had haunted him for so long. It couldn't be. The fire had been extinguished more than a decade ago. Apparently, the smell had not yet dissipated from his painful memories. The man felt dizzy for a moment, but he forced himself to take a deep breath, just as one of the many psychiatrists he had seen had taught him when trying to cope with the aftermath of childhood trauma. Miguel took 5 or 6 deep breaths, and he felt a bit better. Stepping forward to the red gate, he found himself so close that he could reach out and touch its cracked surface. How many times had Miguel opened this gate in his dreams, and now, looking at it in reality, he couldn't forgive his own cowardice. Finally, he pulled the handle, but the gate was locked. Then Miguel rang the bell, which miraculously remained untouched by time. The sound echoed in the clear air, but there was no answer. Everything in the house remained motionless, as if the man were looking at a voluminous picture. Miguel felt uneasy. What if all of this was still just a dream? Fortunately, he remembered that it was still early. Even if someone was in the house, they were probably fast asleep. To confirm his guess, the man carefully examined the windows. The glass looked clean, and he noticed well-kept flowers on the windowsills. So, the house was inhabited. This thought reassured Miguel. He returned to the car, trying not to look towards the frightening gap between the houses, sat in the driver's seat, and closed his eyes. At that moment, the man fell into an uneasy sleep. He dreamed of a girl from his childhood standing by the open red gate, waving at him. Miguel woke up abruptly, as if jolted. His mobile phone was ringing. He glanced at the display, 9 in the morning, an incoming call from Claudia, his faithful assistant. Of course, he hadn't bothered to inform her that there wouldn't be a morning show today. Perhaps there wouldn't be one ever again. Miguel sighed and turned off the phone. At the moment, he didn't feel the strength or the desire to say anything in his defense. At that moment, the red gate swung open, and a woman in her 50s stepped onto the street with a woven basket, which she held carefully by its long, comfortable handles. Miguel remembered that basket well. He had helped carry it home from the vegetable market many times. Catching the woman's strange gaze through the glass, he hastily set his smartphone down on the adjacent seat and, with trembling hands, opened the door. The woman stood there, looking at him bewilderedly, as if she had forgotten where she was going. Miguel approached her, unsure of what to say. For a minute, they silently stared at each other, and then he opened his arms and hugged the woman tightly. "Aunt Marta," he whispered. "Miguelito," the woman replied, discreetly wiping tears from her eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. Aunt Marta only nodded in response. They stood there, looking at each other for a while longer, then the woman suddenly snapped out of it. "Miguelito, come on in quickly, you must be tired from the journey. I was about to go for fresh milk, eggs, and greens, but that can wait. I need to make you breakfast. Aunt Marta, you go ahead, and I'll just sit in the kitchen if you don't mind." I grabbed a snack at the gas station. Marta led Miguel into the house, where it smelled just like always of vanilla and oranges. This scent involuntarily reminded him of times when things weren't going well in his life and he needed to calm down. That was how Laura always smelled. Even if she was covered in dirt after one of their adventures, even after swimming in the lake. Miguel was sure it was her natural scent. The man involuntarily glanced up to where the girl's room used to be. His gaze didn't escape Marta's notice. "Laura doesn't live here anymore," she said. Her words sounded mundane, and Miguel didn't understand what exactly Marta was conveying: disappointment, resignation, or deep sadness. He didn't dare ask where she was now. Perhaps Laura had long been married. This thought made Miguel's heart ache painfully. Marta led him to the kitchen and sat him down at the table. "The others are still asleep. The boys have school at 12, and Luis hasn't been working for a long time." Miguel sat at the round table, covered with a familiar childhood lace white tablecloth that Marta's mother had knitted, and memories flooded over him. The sensations were warm, but bitterness of loss and guilt mingled with them. As if understanding his state, Marta, while continuing to speak, carefully avoided meeting his gaze. "No one will disturb you or bother you with questions and conversations. The coffee in the pot is still hot. Sugar is on the table, cream in the fridge. I'll be back soon." With these words, she left Miguel alone with his past. The man quietly inhaled the scent of vanilla and immersed himself in memories. Miguel lived nearby when Aunt Martha's family moved into this house. His parents died, so the boy was taken care of by his grandparents. His grandfather made wooden dolls on strings. His workshop was in the right wing of the house, adjoining a small semi-empty room. A window was cut into the wall between them, and Grandma sewed crimson satin curtains for it, serving as a curtain. On weekends, Grandpa staged puppet shows. He himself invented plays, which he performed so skillfully, voicing the characters with different voices, that children from all over the neighborhood were delighted. They crowded into the room like sardines in a barrel, eagerly awaiting the start of the show. Laura, Aunt Martha's eldest daughter, also came to watch the puppet shows. She was quiet and shy, and at first Miguel didn't even notice her. But one day, Grandpa invited Laura to the workshop to show her how he made a new doll. Until then, only Miguel had been honored with this privilege, so the boy was intrigued. "Why did you invite this girl?" he later asked Grandpa. "I thought she seemed sad and lonely, so I wanted to cheer her up." Miguel began to secretly observe Laura. It turned out they were classmates, but Laura usually sat in a corner and didn't talk to anyone. Most of the time, her attention was absorbed by a book. Miguel noticed that every time Laura read something different. Once he followed her after school and found himself in the city library. He had never been there before and had never seen so many books anywhere else. Laura returned the volumes she had read and chose new ones, a whole stack. It was obvious that they were heavy to carry. Miguel couldn't resist and approached the girl. "Let me carry them," he offered. Laura silently looked at him, and the boy noticed that her eyes had an unusual emerald hue. Understanding that he could be trusted, the girl nodded gratefully and handed him the books. Thus, their friendship began. Since then, Miguel waited for Laura every morning at the red gate to walk to school together. He took her bag, and they walked slowly along the streets, hardly speaking to each other. Miguel liked to watch how the morning sunbeams touched the strands of Laura's dark brown hair, making them look golden. Miguel himself wanted to touch them, but, of course, he didn't dare. One noon, as the kids were returning home from school, Grandpa called them from the workshop window. "Come here, I have something for you," he winked. Miguel and Laura hurried to the workshop. Grandpa handed each of them a wooden box. The kids opened them and gasped. Inside were tiny ladybugs. "Why aren't they colored, Grandpa?" Miguel asked. "I thought you might want to paint them yourselves, little Miguel," Grandpa kindly replied. "Sit down at the table, take the brushes." The kids eagerly set to work, and soon their ladybugs became almost lifelike. After that, they came to Grandpa's workshop many times after school and helped him create new dolls. Laura particularly liked one of them, a fair-haired and blue-eyed Lucia. She often held the doll in her hands, brushing her hair. Seeing this, Grandpa gave Lucia to Laura as a gift. "Lucy feels very lonely," the girl confessed one day. Grandpa and Miguel exchanged surprised glances. Laura rarely spoke. "Does she need a friend?" Grandpa asked. Laura blushed and nodded silently. Then Grandpa took a sheet of paper and began to draw. He wanted Lucy to instantly like her new friend, so he consulted Laura for details every minute. It flattered Laura greatly that Grandpa was asking for her opinion. Finally, the design of the new doll was ready, and Grandpa promised to start making it the next morning. "What will Lucy's friend be called?" Miguel asked. Grandpa looked at Laura, who blushed again. "Jorge," she answered quietly. Grandpa nodded and wrote the name of the new doll above the drawing. Miguel and Laura watched with excitement as Jorge was born. Grandpa took his time, crafting each detail carefully and meticulously. Jorge was almost ready when it all happened. Some noise interrupted Miguel's reminiscing. He looked up and saw a boy about 15 years old descending the stairs, staring at him intently. "You must be Manuel," Miguel figured out. The last time he saw him, he was just a baby. The boy nodded. "I'm Miguel, a longtime friend of your family," the man introduced himself. The boy shrugged. A man of few words, just like his sister, Miguel thought. "What are you interested in?" the man asked, breaking the silence. Manuel silently nodded towards the wall. Miguel turned his head and was astonished. Why hadn't he noticed this before? The far kitchen wall, which used to be empty, was now covered in maps of different places. Miguel got up and approached to examine them closer. They were all hand-drawn with various markings. Your sister also loved maps very much, Miguel said, feeling the weight of nostalgia in his words. Yeah, she gave me a book about pirate treasures, and that's how it all started, the boy unexpectedly spoke up. But Miguel seemed not surprised at all. Manuel's words triggered another memory in his mind. It happened around the same time Grandpa started making Jorge. That morning, as usual, Miguel waited for Laura at the red gate. She appeared, her eyes mysteriously gleaming. We're not going to school today, she announced. Why? Miguel asked, surprised. We'll be reading a book, Laura whispered mysteriously. Miguel was intrigued. He wasn't much of a book lover like the girl, but there was something in her voice and the way she emphasized the word book that made the boy believe he was in for an exciting adventure. They snuck away to the lake and sat on the shore. In Laura's bag were sandwiches and a thermos of hot chocolate. She pulled out the book, and Miguel's eyes lit up with excitement. Pirate stories, he exclaimed, and Laura laughed joyfully. They read the book all day, then built a pirate ship from the scraps of boards they found on the shore. Later, Miguel's grandfather discovered them. The kids were heavily scolded, but it didn't diminish the impression of that serene, warm day. Miguel remembered that it was then that he and Laura shared a dream to find pirate treasure. Though, fate had other plans. Have you two met yet? Miguel heard Martha's voice behind him. She stood at the table, unpacking groceries from the basket, fresh eggs, greens, cheese, homemade milk, marmalade. Manuel, sitting on a chair with his chin resting on his long, skinny legs, mumbled something indistinct in response. Yes, Manuel told me about his hobby, Miguel replied for both of them. Oh, those cards. Martha complained. They're everywhere, soon the whole house will be filled with them. And how many conversations we had about pirate treasures. It's good he's grown up and stopped believing in them. Manuel snorted, indicating with his demeanor that none of that had anything to do with him. Suddenly, Miguel froze in place, remembering the scribbles on the yellowed sheet of paper. He needed to look at them again. Excuse me, I'll just go to the car, he stammered out, hastily heading to the door. He crossed the yard, opened the red gate, and stepped onto the street. By the car, he turned back to the gaping rectangle between the houses, and the smell of burning hit his nose sharply. It's just my imagination, Miguel reminded himself, opened the door, and began searching for the sheet with the drawing. After a sleepless, restless night, he couldn't remember where he had put it. The smell of burning haunted him, and for a moment, it felt like he was enveloped in fiery heat. Miguel's head spun, and he sat down, burying his face in his hands on the steering wheel. It'll pass soon, just breathe deeply, the man reminded himself silently. But the visions didn't retreat. On the contrary, the scenes from the past seized his consciousness with renewed vigor. Miguel could no longer resist them. This happened on the day when Grandfather was supposed to finish up at Jorge's. Miguel was walking home from school alone. In the middle of the school day, Laura fell ill with stomach pain, and the teacher let her go home. Miguel wanted to escort her, but he wasn't allowed to. The whole class was taking a test. Several blocks from home, he already sensed that something was wrong. People were anxiously talking, pointing at the smoke rising above the rooftops. Miguel heard the word fire several times. He knew it was very dangerous, but it never crossed his mind that it could happen to him and his family. Then he saw familiar faces, neighbors. They were running down their street, shouting loudly, as the space around them grew smaller and smaller. The rest felt like a dream. He heard fire truck sirens, tried to push through the crowd, called for his family, and finally found himself in his grandfather's strong embrace. It's all right, Miguelito, it's all right. We're all safe and sound, it's just a house. Miguel burst into tears. He was so used to their big, cozy house, where objects, furniture, and even the doormat seemed alive. And then a thought pierced him. "But what about Jorge, grandfather?" he shouted. It was very noisy around, and if his voice had been drowned out by 100 other sounds then. If only grandfather hadn't heard him. But grandfather did hear him. He knew how important Jorge was, how the children awaited him. He released his grandson from his embrace and rushed into the burning workshop. No one dared to stop the owner. Miguel waited with a pounding heart. Several minutes passed, but grandfather didn't appear. Maybe Jorge got scared and hid, and grandfather is looking for him, the boy thought, but he'll find him very soon, and everything will be all right. The boy waited and waited, but nothing happened. And then the worst happened. The roof collapsed, and the air was pierced by Grandma's desperate cry. Miguel opened his eyes. The memories beyond that were blurred and more like a fog. He didn't understand himself what was happening for real and what was only in his head. They lived with Marta, and Grandma longed terribly for Grandpa and their home. She hardly ever left the room. Miguel kept going to school, though a wound inside him was bleeding, making it hard to breathe. Laura was always there, holding his hand on the way to school and back. As usual, they hardly spoke, but the scent of vanilla and oranges saved Miguel from falling into the black abyss of despair. True, once Laura wanted to talk to Miguel about Grandpa, but as soon as she mentioned Jorge, the boy had a hysterical fit, and he spent a week in the hospital. After that, Laura became even quieter and spent almost all her time with books, afraid to look Miguel in the eye. And then the grandmother passed away, unable to recover from the loss of her husband. When Miguel turned 16, he ran away, realizing he could no longer stay in Marta's house. Before leaving, he quietly entered Laura's room and gazed at the sleeping girl for a long time, sensing that he was saying goodbye to her forever. Miguel woke up from someone touching his shoulder. He turned his head and saw Marta's worried face. "Are you okay, Miguelito?" the woman asked. "I got worried when you didn't come back for so long." The car door was open. "I think I fell asleep," Miguel replied. Miguel looked around and noticed a drawing of Jorge peeking out from between the seats. He carefully took it out and, stepping out of the car, unfolded it to show Marta. "This is a doll sketch made by Grandpa. And these scribbles, I don't remember." Marta scrutinized the drawing. "This is Laura's handwriting," she finally said. She was also obsessed with treasure hunts and pirate treasures. "You know better than me. But how did Grandpa's drawing end up with her, and why did she draw a map on it?" Miguel asked, realizing Marta probably wouldn't have an answer to his question. As he suspected, Marta shook her head. "You know, Laura hardly ever spoke. She always kept everything to herself." Marta suddenly started crying. "Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I'm a bad mother, am I, Miguelito?" Miguel opened his arms to Marta and let her cry. "Where is she now?" Miguel finally dared to ask. "She lives in the capital. She rarely comes home, calls once a week, but mostly just to stay silent on the phone." "Has she met anyone, gotten married?" Miguel asked, feeling his heart stop as he awaited the answer. Marta shook her head. "I think there's no lonelier soul in the city than our Laura. And it saddens me deeply." Marta cried again, but Miguel suddenly felt very light. "I want to see her. Aunt Marta, please give me Laura's address." Miguel drove confidently as the day outside gradually faded, giving way to a warm evening. Marta's address was entered in the navigator, and Miguel, sensing the meeting, could clearly feel his nervousness. Seeing his childhood friend after so many years was no joke, but Miguel knew that he needed Laura now more than ever before. He briefly stopped by home to take a shower and change into fresh clothes. The answering machine was full of unheard messages, but he paid no attention to it. Miguel quickly got ready and got back behind the wheel. Laura lived in the southern part of the city, where tiny cottages nestled on the hillside. Miguel smiled. He had no doubt that this girl wouldn't choose a skyscraper for her life. Even in the bustling capital, Laura found a place she loved, just as quiet and secluded as she was. Miguel quickly found house number 17. A solitary vanilla-colored lantern burned above the porch, and Miguel's heart suddenly beat a little faster. He climbed a few steps and rang the doorbell. A tinkling sound of a bell echoed from within the house, then everything fell silent again. The silence refused to be disturbed. The house was empty. Miguel glanced at his watch. It was around 9. Where could Laura have spent the evening? At the library? But they've long been closed. Miguel absent-mindedly rubbed the tip of his nose, a childhood habit inherited from his grandfather, which he resorted to in difficult situations. The man was about to leave when suddenly something familiar caught his attention. Something similar he had seen recently. Miguel leaned closer. From the gap between the door and the jamb protruded a blue paper corner. Miguel pulled it, and in his hands was an envelope, exactly like the one with his grandfather's drawing. Impatiently, Miguel tore the edge and pulled out a piece of paper from the envelope. He immediately recognized Laura's light and slightly flamboyant handwriting. "Find me at our spot," Miguel read aloud. "Laura, are you serious?" he exclaimed and unexpectedly burst into laughter. It was the best joke in his life. Miguel got behind the wheel, grabbed a double espresso from the nearest cafe, and set off on the way back. Along the road, he stopped several times to get more coffee and even dozed off in one of the parking lots. At dawn, Miguel was at the lake. He immediately noticed a bright orange tent and the remnants of a campfire nearby. Miguel got back into the car and headed to the nearest supermarket, where he picked up bread, cheese, and sausages. Returning to the lake, he lit a fire and started cooking breakfast. It didn't take half an hour before the tent stirred. "I really hope it's Laura in there and not some 2-meter muscle man," Miguel thought with a laugh. The zipper at the entrance opened, and Miguel felt relieved and joyful as he noticed a delicate female hand. Then its owner appeared. She hadn't changed much, the same long dark brown hair, the same emerald eyes, and fair, almost translucent skin. The girl looked at Miguel in astonishment, as if she couldn't quite believe that he had actually come here. "Hello, Laura," Miguel said softly. She didn't say a word, just tilted her head slightly and smiled in response. But Miguel knew the worth of her smile alone. He approached and hugged Laura. She pressed herself against him with her fragile body, as if afraid that he might suddenly disappear again. And then she cried. "Why are you crying, my dear?" Miguel wondered. "I'm here with you." "Jorge," Laura whispered. "It's my fault." Miguel looked into her eyes. "What are you guilty of?" Laura bit her lip. Translate into English. "On that day my stomach didn't hurt," the girl confessed very quietly. Miguel listened attentively. "I lied to the teacher. I really wanted to see Jorge. I sneaked into your grandfather's workshop." Inside Miguel, everything went cold, but he forced himself to take a deep breath and exhale. Now was not the time for a panic attack. "What were you doing there?" "I took Jorge." "Why, Laura?" "I wanted to hide him, like a treasure, so that later we could dig him up together. And I took him here, to the lake, to do it. And when I came back, I found out that your grandfather—" Miguel closed his eyes. So Jorge wasn't in the workshop anymore, so— "Forgive me," he heard Laura whisper. He looked at her. Her big emerald eyes were very close, and in them splashed such deep sadness that Miguel couldn't hold back. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "You're not to blame for anything, Laura," he replied. "I am the one to blame." Laura stroked his hair as if she wanted to take away all his sadness, bitterness, and guilt that he had carried within him all these years. "Forgive yourself too," Laura whispered softly. "Your grandfather wouldn't want you to be sad. He always said that life is meant for joy." She hugged him, and Miguel quietly sobbed, while the scent of vanilla and orange enveloped him, giving him peace and tranquility. Then they had breakfast by the fire, and Laura said softly, "Do you think Jorge is still here? I buried him under those willows." "Let's check," Miguel replied. He brought some tools from the car, miraculously found in the trunk, and together they dug up a simple wooden box in which Jorge lay. "Where's my girlfriend? I don't want to be alone," Miguel squeaked in a thin voice, imitating the doll's speech. "She's in the backpack," Laura smiled, replied. "Lucia has been with me all these years, waiting for Jorge." Then the girl was silent for a while and added, "And I was waiting for you, Miguel. I watched your show every week. I thought you had changed a lot, become heartless. But when I accidentally saw you helping your grandmother in the supermarket, I realized that you were still the same Miguelito. And then I decided to give you Jorge's drawing." Miguel looked at the girl with gratitude and love. "Laura, I've been running away from myself and my own memories for so long. But it was a path to nowhere." For a while, he frowned, then the wrinkles on his forehead smoothed out, and he laughed. "How glad I am that fate threw me that old lady. Thanks to her, I found you again, my Laura." Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.